Hello, friends of the internet, and welcome to our webinar on how to choose Jamstack solutions to supercharge your web development. My name is Joel Vardy. I'm CTO at Agility, and I'm joined today, really pleased to be joined today by Max from Ickeus. Max, I always say Ickeus wrong, I think, but is that the way to say it? Tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us about Ickeus.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. And I think Ickeus, however you want to pronounce it, that's fine. We haven't fully locked in how it should be pronounced, but Ickeus sounds very good to me. And yeah, my name is Max, and I'm the founder and CEO of Ickeus. And we do and have done Jamstack development since 2019, and we work exclusively with in the Jamstack ecosystem. So basically, we don't work with the older technologies at all, such as WordPress, for example. So we have been solely focusing on Jamstack, Headless CMS, Next.js, Gatsby, and so on. So that's my background in the Jamstack ecosystem, if you will. So I'm pretty familiar with everything in the scene. So
excellent. Cool. Yeah, I mean, you and I have done Jamstack webinars before, so it's great to have you with us to answer some questions. Lots to go through today. We're going to focus really on enterprise today. And in my experience, Jamstack has become the standard for enterprise projects. And what we've noticed is that demands of how to choose Jamstack solutions and all the different pieces of what that solution looks like and how it works has become pretty specific, and there's a lot of different options and a lot of different categories. What's your experience here, Max? What have you seen that kind of stands out for enterprise solutions with Jamstack?
For enterprise, it's things suddenly become a lot more complicated for choosing the right services for the use case. Obviously, these enterprise projects are very expensive, and they take a long time. And usually these enterprise projects are maintained for years, like 5 or 10 years.
Right.
And that's why the already complex ecosystem of Jamstack, a lot of different moving parts, a lot of different services becomes a lot more complex because you have to be very mindful about what services, headless CMS, static site generators you're using. So you don't end up in a situation where you have to rebuild your site in 1 or 2 years again, because these are very expensive and people invest in these things a lot. So that's definitely one thing that's popped out.
Yeah. Now, what's really interesting is that I think one of the reasons that we're seeing Jamstack as being the sort of like the overall technology umbrella that enterprise organizations are choosing, or even like really evaluating carefully, is like yes, they are complex projects, but previously under sort of older architectures and technologies, you talk about a rollout of one of these systems, complex systems, one of those rollouts could actually take multiple years. Whereas now a complex system, I think it's not unreasonable to say it's going to be like a 4 to 6 month type solution for, a fairly complex enterprise organization's rollout. Does that sort of line up with what you've seen, Max?
Yeah, absolutely. It's based on our experience, we have done quite complex migrations from the legacy systems to the new systems, and it's taken 3 to 4 months approximately.
Right.
And the key advantage for Jamstack and the kind of new way to build websites and applications is that you can roll out things gradually and keep adding. As before, you had to kind of do it all in once and in a monolithic way. Now you can just do some of the features, go live, and then keep adding the features like in a CI, continuous integration and development way.
Right.
That's one of the key things that's changed. Everything's faster. Everything can be put out live faster. So for sure, that's true.
Love that. So, okay, we're not going to talk about what Jamstack is. The idea is, we've got lots of other webinars to talk about that. In fact, our last webinar that I did with Max maybe a year ago was like, hey, what is Jamstack? But at this point, we're going to help you choose the different pieces of a fairly basically, these are pretty much goes into every single Jamstack solution that's out there. First, we're going to look at is CMS. What's the best CMS to choose for your enterprise organization? What's the best framework? And when a framework, I'm talking about like a development framework that your website, most likely your website that you're looking to build is going to be hosted on. we'll go through those options, and we'll get Max to weigh in on what his experiences are there. And then we'll look at hosting, with the assumption that most Jamstack solutions are going to be some sort of website. It doesn't have to be, though. They could be an app, but we're talking mostly where there's a website focus here. How are you going to host that solution? So we'll go through all those options, and then we'll talk about what a successful implementation of those options looks like. So let's dive right in. First thing, CMS. Obviously, full disclosure, CMS is near and dear to my heart. I'm CTO at Agility. Agility CMS is the platform that we work with. But I recognize that, what is a great CMS for your organization? It could be a lot of different factors that go into that. And let's just look at, I'm not going to sort of sell you on Agility here. I'm going to sell you on the benefits of a great CMS selection. And the first one, I think it seems like a no-brainer, but it's still, I feel we'll repeat this a lot, is you really need to be looking at headless and SaaS. Lots of CMS options that are out there claim headless or API driven, but they're not really SaaS. They're not really cloud-based. You sort of have to host that. Max, in your experience, is this still a confusing thing for people, or have the enterprise organizations kind of figured this out?
I think everyone has confusion regarding this because there are so many different options available for the headless CMS, and even in that domain, you have different sub areas for different kinds of headless CMSs.
Right.
So you might have the SaaS-based headless CMS, cloud-based, fully managed, and you just use the API and the interface that's provided, just like with Agility CMS. Then you have different options where you have to host everything yourself, the database, everything fully self-managed, but the particular headless CMS provider might provide some platform to help you manage that. And then the third option that's seen in the scene is the Git-based CMSs, which are kind of like not similar than the API and cloud-based CMSs. So there are a lot of different kinds of CMSs, even in the kind of niche headless CMS scene. So yeah, for sure, that's causing a confusion even for enterprise clients.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, in my experience, what a lot of enterprise folks are looking for, they are looking for something to be hosted in a SaaS service now. They don't want to increase their own IT footprint. That's a real change. That's a real diversion from how it used to be with a sort of old school enterprise where folks wanted to contain everything in-house. And there still are some organizations like that, but I think this is the explosion now into the kind of growth that a lot of organizations are having, is they're looking at growing with services as opposed to growing on taking on, more IT debt.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, the next point that we could talk about forever, and I've done, all kinds of webinars on these already, is the idea of composable DXP. And my advice is to choose a CMS that can be one part of your composable DXP, and it usually becomes the center. It's where all your content is, and that's, I think, a really important piece, because there's you mentioned this earlier, Max, where it's like you want to start with the basics and then you can add on the different pieces. Whereas before, with the sort of traditional DXPs, you kind of had to buy it all at once. And do you feel that customers are doing this? Are they starting with like, hey, let's get whatever we need to as a basics piece of functionality so we can, solve the problems that we have today, and then we can add on pieces later? Is that the kind of approach that you're seeing these organizations take?
Yeah, absolutely. Nowadays, everything's moving really fast, and the competition is growing a lot for these bigger enterprise companies. So, of course, these companies need to move fast, and the fastest way to go forward is to put out an MVP or a good enough foundation for the website or web application, and then continue adding those features, services, or whatever that's needed. And the scene is very dynamic and competitive, so often you don't even know what you're going to need one month from now. So yeah, for sure, it's the new standard, I think, to have the composability for the CMS and your content and website. Absolutely.
Yeah. So choose a CMS that allows that composability, allows it to be one piece of what's probably a bigger puzzle. But it's usually a central piece. So make sure that that's part of it. Because Jamstack solutions and most enterprise solutions are going to have some sort of focus on a website, right? A website is the anchor for your digital branding for I would say virtually every single organization out there, and especially enterprise organizations. It represents you online. Make sure that the CMS is able to allow you to focus on that and to actually really make it so that the people who are working on that website, like the editors, the people who are writing the content, are able to create pages and to work on that without having to get developers involved all the time. That's a really key point. Now, I'm talking to a developer here, Max. Max likes to be involved all the time, but certainly the whole point of a CMS is that you don't have to make content changes. You don't want to have developers making content changes. And I find a lot of headless CMS implementations that I've seen actually have developers making content changes. Is that in your experience too, Max, where it's like sometimes it doesn't really work out the way people had thought when they actually implement a headless CMS?
Usually our intention is that we don't have to be involved in the content creation. That's our ultimate end goal, that we set up any headless CMS, any system, in a way that we don't have to be involved, us developers. Of course, sometimes there might be certain situations where you need a more technical person, but usually for basic content changes, that's the marketing or content manager's job to do. And we lay the foundation for them so they can do their job easily and effortlessly. So
yeah, and for certain, one of the main use cases for folks to be able to do is they want to be able to go create pages on the website, things like landing pages or update content on different pages. But another sort of a really important branch of how CMS has evolved is the ability to work within a component-driven design. Folks like Max and his team will generate, design systems and build components. We're going to talk about frameworks in a second, but they're going to build these visual components that need to be driven by the CMS. And you want to make sure that the CMS works well within that system. And there is sort of lots of different sort of things you want to look at when you're evaluating to make sure that it works with a component-driven design. It's a really key factor. And then this is one where I put it at the bottom of this list. It tends to go to the top of a list because we think of content hubs and omni-channel. But right out of the box, headless CMS is going to give you the ability to be omni-channel, right? It's an API. It's not tied to your website, right? Totally different from like a WordPress where the website and the CMS is the same thing. Do you feel that, Max, that I think this is why people have chosen headless CMS, right? Because that means that they can have a backend for their content that's not tied to any particular website. You say there's a lot of confusion. Are people clear about that in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that's one of the key advantages people are looking for from their CMS. They need high level of customizability and a high level of omni-channel potential, if you will. So, of course, when companies move fast and they play in a very competitive landscape, they might need to do more new kind of different websites or different parts for their brand or website. And often it's more convenient to use the same content hub or headless CMS for this purpose. And of course, it may be used for any other applications as well, such as mobile or anything that you might need it for. So I think for sure enterprise companies are looking for this kind of features from headless CMS.
Yeah, with these kind of solutions, with basically the four, sort of 5 things that we've outlined here, this is going to allow you to get started small, like Max was saying before, like build your website, get the pages on there, implement the component-driven architecture that is part of any modern website these days, and that can help you establish your content hub. Sometimes that hub is part of that same initial website, and you just share content from that same project out to other channels. But you could also have a separate project, or there's lots of different ways to kind of mix and match your architecture. But this will definitely get you started on the right path as an enterprise organization. And I think overall, my advice is to first of all, do a very thorough evaluation of any products you're going to work with. Definitely go through that. Doesn't take forever. I wouldn't spend more than 30 days on an evaluation. That's usually a good chunk of time. Set aside that amount of time, 2 weeks to 30 days. But evaluate the product and also evaluate the relationship. Make sure that you're working with the company that you want to work with, because this should be a long-term relationship. It should be something where this is a multi-year relationship where you want to have somebody who wants to work closely with you. That's definitely my voice and that's, that goes beyond Headless CMS, goes to any SaaS system that you're working with, because you want to make sure that's a really positive relationship and make sure that you believe, they believe in what you believe in. Now we're going to jump onto frameworks now. And this is a really deep topic. And Max, you've got, you mentioned like right on your homepage, you guys talk about Next.js and Gatsby as frameworks. Let's just go through a little bit about some of these framework options that you have. So for the first thing that we've talked about, and this is, I think, where Jamstack kind of got stuck for a little while, is the idea of static generated sites. What does that mean, Max, with this sort of static generation? Is it still relevant for enterprise organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. Static generation basically means that we are pre-building the pages that we need to show to the end users, and they exist before the users try to view them. So this creates massive benefits for performance and security and other things. But yeah, for sure, it's still a huge thing for these enterprise sites, because some websites might have thousands of pages, and
right.
Some of this content is very static, and you don't need to kind of dynamically render it every time the users view it.
Right.
So yeah, it will create benefits for performance, especially for these larger enterprise sites.
Yeah, and the fact that it's statically generated means we can host it. It doesn't have to be hosted on a web server, so there's not like far less of a vector for being hacked, things like that.
Denial of service attacks, that's eliminated by having a static website, essentially.
Yeah, so it's interesting. AgilityCMS.com, our website, back in the day, years ago, used to be hosted on ASP.NET, kind of before static generation. And we didn't really have any problems with outages, but it was a thing where we always had to have a server running to run our website. We've had our website, the AgilityCMS.com website, running statically. And now, like, you just don't even really think about it. You don't have to worry about performance. You don't have to really worry about security. It just kind of, you can just put it there and make sure it's working, and it just runs and it's always up, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes it a lot easier, and you don't have to worry about it as much as before.
Yeah. So, but the thing with static generation that you do have to think about is if you do have a site with 1,000 or tens of thousands of pages, if they're all statically generated, it may take some time to generate that. Which is why people also want to consider the idea of server rendering. So we talk about static generation. What does server rendering mean, Max?
Server rendering means that, contrary to static pages, we don't actually have the page. The page actually doesn't exist before the user tries to view it. So whenever I would go to a dynamic server rendered site, the server would actually compile the web page while I request it, and kind of compile all the data and information that's needed, and then return the HTML page. So contrary to static pages, dynamic builds it whenever I need it, and static already exists when I need it. So that's kind of their main difference.
Now, these are two totally different concepts, but there are frameworks that will do both of these things. And I think as frameworks mature, they get better at doing these things and making it kind of mix and match a little bit. Yeah. Certainly, of the frameworks that I have, there's some frameworks on the right here. You can see we've got React, Next, Gatsby, and a few others. Are you starting to see, where people are? It's a more easy choice than it used to be for frameworks.
Yeah, absolutely. So this moves very fast as well as to all things nowadays with web development. But at first, we kind of saw that Gatsby was the main framework to choose. And now transitioning to this date, we can see the Next.js has become the kind of de facto standard for the framework of choice. So we can see this kind of competition here with the frameworks, but as someone who is very involved in the industry, I can tell for a fact that Next.js is one of the most widely adopted framework right now.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is the idea now both Next.js and Gatsby they both do static generation. They both can do server rendering if you want to. And this idea of incremental generation was a thing where I think it was kind of trading back and forth there in the early 2020s when we were starting to see this evolve. But in my mind, for an enterprise organization, especially if you have a large website, the combination of the static generation, server rendering, and incremental building, allows you to have this really big website that can update really fast. You can do things like preview, which is a server rendering technology. So you can see what the website looks like before it's generated. There's all kinds of stuff that goes on here. Next.js is just really good at that. And I recommend it for pretty much every organization. Is it what you recommend to pretty much everyone now, Max?
Yeah, absolutely. Since without going into too much detail, we started off with Gatsby, and during our existence, we have worked with Gatsby and then transitioned to Next.js. And based on our experience, we for sure recommend Next.js, just because it has some more advanced features, and it's slightly more low level, hands-on, so you can do stuff, more complex stuff more easily. Hence, Gatsby is more opinionated on some stuff. So yeah, for sure.
Now, these frameworks are continuing to evolve. I follow the Next.js and Gatsby and all these frameworks. By the way, they're both based on React as a front end. And so if you have React developers, and if you want to work with that as a technology in particular, if that matters to you, then definitely Next.js is also a good choice for that, just because React is such a prevalent technology and people really do tend to want that. There are other systems that are coming out, but I think there's a technology that I'm really excited about, and it's called edge functions. And we're starting to see this now with some of the, we're going to talk hosting a little bit and server frameworks there, the idea of hosting and VMs, things like that. But this idea of edge functions is a framework technology too. And I first saw it with Next.js, and I think it's still in beta, the idea that you can do middleware that runs on the edge. What have you had run into that as a thing where people are starting to experiment with edge functions yet, Max? It's still very, very new, but I think from an enterprise organization, there's a lot of benefits that will come from that.
Yeah, of course, this is something new with Next.js, but as a concept, this like kind of personalizing content and doing middleware to handle certain stuff is not new, and that's been done as long as I can remember, and I'm quite young. But I mean, for sure, people are looking into more ways to deliver personalized content near the user. So, for example, if I were to connect to Agility CMS from Finland, I would love to see content that's personalized for me or something like that. But there are also other use cases for edge functions, just for performance, and just kind of localization is just one example, and it's limitless what you can do with it, basically.
Yeah. So a lot to talk about edge functions. I don't want to go too deep, but definitely personalization and having authenticated content be rendered right in the page. These things all combine together. These four kind of concepts: static generation, server rendering, incremental generation, and edge functions. They kind of all work together. And I think it's important to look at a framework that can be really flexible in how it handles these kind of requirements and benefits and works together. That's why I choose Next.js often. But it doesn't mean that if your organization is embedded deeply with .NET or Java, or that you don't need to have a server framework and you can use raw React or Vue or something like that. That's fine too. So there's lots of different ways. Jamstack doesn't exclude things. That's what I really like. It's a very inclusionary architecture. But there is a new framework that comes out, it seems like every month. I know one of the ones I'm looking at is Remix, which is a recently open sourced framework it's based on React. Seems like it's got a lot of cool benefits. It's very opinionated based on server rendering. It's really interesting. But definitely, I think Next.js, as Max was saying, is a great selection for pretty much everybody. I've seen some organizations, some longtime Agility customers who were on .NET before that have migrated to to Next.js. And the improvement to the UX of their web properties has been incredible. They're faster, they're more lightweight. There's so much more potential there. So I really exciting to see these frameworks sort of being adopted by enterprise now. But of course, if you're going to have a framework, you have to host it somewhere. And there are some really interesting options that have evolved and are continue to evolve for hosting. And I think one of the biggest things here is framework support. Max, we're going to sort of recommend Next.js for a lot of folks. For that framework, is there a hosting option that you think is the most optimal for Next.js?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Vercel, as Vercel has actually developed Next.js, and
right.
kind of the company maintains Next.js. So of course that's going to play well with Next.js, as they are part of the same ecosystem. But also Netlify works well with it as well. But maybe Vercel would be a more optimal choice for Next.js.
Yeah, it's interesting how we've had Vercel and Netlify really kind of go head to head, and it's been great for us as sort of consumers of these frameworks, because this kind of feature fight has really benefited us. So they are neck and neck, I think, with a lot of concepts and features. I would say it's probably easier to host on Vercel, especially if you want to get all those different features like preview mode and all the different edge functions, all that sort of stuff. It really just works. Point it at your Git, whatever that Git is, and it just goes. There are a lot of things that Netlify can do as well. And so I think it's worth evaluating both. You can certainly evaluate them free of cost. But then we look at a few of the things. What kind of SLA are you going to get? And this is where we get into the nitty gritty specifically for enterprise. Your enterprise organization may have certain SLA requirements that you need to look at. So it's really worth digging into deep, a little bit more deeply with the teams at Vercel and Netlify, or whoever you're going to work with. It could be Azure, AWS, or Google, in terms of what kind of SLA can you get and what kind of cost is that going to bring you. So all of those things are kind of tied up. And I think you want to look at, we were just talking about this before the session about how there's kind of like, there's two categories. There's Azure, AWS, Google, which is I put as like, those are the public clouds that you can definitely host any Jamstack site. And interestingly enough, Vercel and Netlify themselves are written on mostly AWS, but they are starting to be hosted on multi-cloud as well. So they're using those backends for their for their stuff, right? So I would consider Vercel and Netlify as sort of new school, and then the Azure, AWS, Google they're a lot easier to kind of sell internally to your organization, because you might already have agreements with them. And so if that is who you are, and as an organization, it's like, hey, we're an AWS sort of hosted thing. They already do all our stuff, or we're a Microsoft shop. You can maintain that, and Max and his team or our team can help you make choices about how specifically to do hosting on those frameworks. Whereas Vercel, you do, like, it's just a drop down. Hey, what's your framework? It just works, right? That's pretty nice. Now there's another framework that's kind of picking up speed. Had a lot of announcements lately, and that's Cloudflare. Max, have you ever worked with Cloudflare as a hosting, as a it's a CDN, but have you worked with it as a hosting framework yet?
No, I haven't had the chance to work with the hosting side of things with Cloudflare. I know it's pretty new, and they are continuing to develop it, but we haven't had the chance. We mostly work with Vercel and Netlify, so that's not familiar to us yet.
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot the same thing. We're recommending pretty much everyone look hard at Next.js and evaluate that. Definitely, look hard and evaluate between Vercel and Netlify, which is going to work for you. And usually that comes down to not necessarily the framework support, although that's a big part of it, but it could also be what kind of SLAs and cost and what kind of enterprise package they have. But then I think Cloudflare is my prediction. This is a future prediction. I think Cloudflare is going to overtake and have some different benefits that will help people to choose that between when it comes to edge functions, because that's where they're really great. And my second prediction is that Fastly, their edge functions will pick up as well, and sort of. I would say where Vercel and Netlify are in a feature race, Fastly and Cloudflare are kind of in the race for edge functions. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it's interesting to follow up and see what happens.
But definitely when you were evaluating these frameworks, I certainly look for the enterprise plans. Get talking to someone there, one of their sales reps, to make sure that the relationship with the enterprise part of that organization is going to work with you, and make sure that you're getting exactly what your organization needs before you make too many decisions purely based on technology. There's a technology side and there's a relationship side that you want to keep in sync. So with that being said, you've chosen a CMS, chosen a framework, chosen hosting. Let's talk more about what a successful implementation will actually look like. And so, Max, this is a lot where you come in, because often, you work as an implementation partner. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. I clicked the wrong button. Once folks they decide, hey, this is what our team structure is, and definitely the team structure of who's going to be working on a project is usually predetermined, but something where we always say, make sure you have your team figured out of who's actually going to be part of this project. But then, who is your development partner going to be? And Max, that's usually when I know when we've worked together, we would bring you in, or you'll bring us in to when you've already been pre-selected by someone to kind of build something. How does that relationship work with you guys? When you're the development partner, just talk me through that a little bit.
So I like to think of each case as unique. So there's no single truth how we work with different teams, but usually how we might integrate ourselves with other teams as their development partner or technology partners, that we will do whatever it takes to help them achieve their requirements and expectations for the technology we're helping them build. So we for most projects, enterprise projects, we are a part of their tech team, and usually come in as the more experienced Jamstack development partner to make sure that everything is built correctly. Because as said previously in the beginning, that these kind of bigger Jamstack projects tend to be quite complex, in a sense that it's easy to get carried away by the different choices and routes you can take. And we have done this for 3 years now, ever since kind of Jamstack became more popular. And we know what works and what doesn't work. So we are able to help not only by great quality code and that stuff, but more high level architecture, and just being there to make sure that everything is going in the right direction in the sense of the larger picture. Of course, we will also help with the kind of dirty work development for a lot of our clients, like making sure the code is built correctly and actually developing components and modules and pages.
That's interesting what you're talking about too, is, you could be brought in as a development partner for an organization that already has a development team, but you become the Jamstack experts. And I'm sure there's a certain amount of teaching that would happen with the current developers, and then kind of leading from an architectural side of things. With the assumption, and I didn't write this here because it's kind of an assumption that I think is pretty clear, you need to have good, strong requirements for what you're actually building, as opposed to, hey, we need a new CMS because I'm not sure why, but because somebody told me I needed a new CMS and a new website. Having strong requirements about what you're actually building is really, really important to help develop the right kind of relationship with your development partner, to come up with a great system architecture, which is usually, Max, I would assume that a lot of these times you're going to help work with the system architecture to kind of take what started with and evolve it and come up with a living document, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we do a lot. So we work with our clients and help them come up with a good plan and a good list of requirements for their system and architecture, because it's going to be very important down the line if you want to maintain or do your project in budget and reach a certain level of quality. You need to have those requirements, and that's where we also step in. Before we actually start developing anything, we help our clients come up with the requirements and just making sure that it's the best possible set of requirements for them.
Right. Yeah. And then, underneath the system architecture is something we call content architecture. So this is from a CMS point of view, really important to have that set up so that, the content that is going to be sort of piecing together and sitting at the center of your system architecture is going to sort of solve all those requirements in a way that works to empower all the different teams in the team structure, to make sure that the editors are empowered, that, hey, if we need to make new landing pages, we don't need to get a developer involved. We can implement all the components in our component design system and all those different things. And I think the idea here, and this is really important, especially for enterprise organizations, because it typically tends to be a big decision. We want to build for the next 5 to 10 years. We don't want to build something that needs to be swapped out and taken apart and destroyed and gotten rid of, and we would hate it within a year. We want to build something that you can evolve and continue to work with for the next at least a decade. And actually, if you look at Agility's customers, most of our average customer lifetime is around a decade for folks that tend to stay with us. So this is you want to have a good relationship. You want to pick the right team that you want to work with, as well as the technology. And certainly, what we've heard from, and a shout out to you, Max, and your team, the folks that have worked with you, that we've worked with, they always say, we love working with Max and his team. Great relationship. They always do, as you say, do what it takes to get it done and be successful for that particular organization. So
I'm happy to hear that.
To you guys. Yeah. Max, thanks for joining us today, and thank you for following along and following our conversation. I certainly want to continue the conversation. You can follow Agility on Twitter at Agility CMS and connect there. You can connect with Max's team at ICUS on Twitter. There are lots more events coming and webinars. We're doing these things all the time. agilitycms.com/events. So check that out. I will say too, if you're a current customer or partner, keep an eye on your inbox for invites. We have partners and customer sessions coming along where we're going to be doing, announcements and a bunch of different sort of stuff to get a deeper connection with our current folks who are already current customers and partners. So check your inboxes for those. If you want to get in touch directly with Max or I, you can certainly email us, joel@agilitysms.com or max@icus.com. Max, it's been great having you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And until next time, I guess.
You bet. Until next time, everyone, take care, and we'll see you around the bend.
Thank you.